So one day God speaks to Joshua and he says, I want you to go into the promised land. Well, the problem is that Jericho was standing in the way between Joshua and the promised land. Joshua wasn't just any ordinary city. It was a powerful city. It was a huge walled fortress. And Joshua, he decides to send 2 spies to go into the land to kind of check the mood of the city. And so these 2 spies make their way into the city and they find themselves in a most unlikely place. They find themselves in the house of a prostitute named Rahab. Now, how did 2 spies find themselves in a house of prostitution? Well, I think they were actually pretty ingenious. I mean, they weren't there because of the extracurricular activities. They were there because it was a place of men to come and go. It was a place of real discretion. They find themselves there, and I'm sure they begin to engage in conversation with some of the men that are coming and going, and they discover that the mood of the city is one of fear and terror. Like the whole city knows that the Israelite army is making their way towards Jericho, and there's great fear that's in the city that they're gonna be completely and totally destroyed. As the spies interact and engage with Rahab, the prostitute, they discover that she herself also understands that the city is terrified as well. And she says something that's really interesting. She says, our city has heard about the power of Jehovah, that he was the one that parted the Red Sea for you as you escaped out of Egypt, and that you guys walked on dry ground. I mean, what God does that? Now, I think it's interesting because that took place 40 years. I mean, they were telling the stories of what God had done in the heart of Israel 40 years before, and this is a pagan city. Well, in the middle of their conversation, a knock comes on the wall, and 2 soldiers ask Rahab, where are the spies that have come to destroy this city? And she makes a decision at that moment. She decides to place her faith and confidence in Jehovah God. And she tells the soldiers, and in a sense, she's disloyal to her own community. And she says, I don't know where the spies are. They left. They were here, but they left, and they're along the road. And if you go out, I'm sure you'll be able to catch them. Well, the soldiers immediately take off. Rahab ascends the stairs and goes up to her rooftop, and it's there that she has hidden the spies. And then she begins to have a conversation with the spies, and she says this, she says, listen, I want you to know something, that I know that God has given you the city, that we don't stand a chance. And then she makes a powerful profession of faith. She says this, she says, I believe that Jehovah, he's the God above and he's the God below on earth. Like at that moment, she places a profession of faith in Jehovah God. Like she understands how powerful God is. I think she understands more of who God is than the spies do. And it's at that point that she takes a big step of faith and she looks the spies in the eyes and she says, I just have one request. Will you save me and my family? Like she recognized that her life was in the hands of these spies. And in reality, her life was in the hands of God. She says, will you save me? And the spies immediately respond to her and they say, we will save you. We will save you. You've been good to us. We want to be good to you. There's this covenant that takes place between the spies and Rahab, and it's a covenant of goodness. The Hebrew word is hesed. It means kindness, goodness, loyalty. It's what we're studying in terms of the fruit of the Holy Spirit, that the fruit of goodness is such a vital part of who we are as believers in Jesus. And it doesn't come because of who we are. It's not our goodness. It's not our strength. It's not what we do. It's who God is. And this is what Rahab did. Like she had experienced and placed her faith in God. She had experienced his goodness, understood his goodness to the Israel 40 years before. And as a result of that, God poured out his goodness in her life. as the spies are getting ready to make their way outside of the city, the spies tell Rahab that in order for them to protect her, in order for her to continue to experience the goodness of God, that she needed to put down a scarlet rope down her wall. She lived in the wall, so to speak. And so they wanted her to take this scarlet rope and hang it down the wall. And it would indicate to the spies that when they came to destroy the city, that anyone in her home, they would say that they would be responsible for. I think the spies knew what they were doing. Like 40 years before this, God had commanded the children of Israel to slaughter a lamb and then to take the blood of that lamb and apply it on the doorposts of their home. And God said, if you apply the blood on the doorposts of your home, when the angel of death passes by, it will not invade your home because it sees the blood of the lamb. It's a powerful symbol. And the spies, in a sense, were saying the same thing. We want you to hang that rope outside your wall, and it will signify to us that we'll save you and your family. It's what Jesus asks of us. He asks of us to receive his sacrifice and his blood in our life, and it's the scarlet rope in our heart. The rest of the story, of course, continues, and the children of Israel and the armies of Israel make their way towards Jericho. And as they do, the city, from my perspective, I'm sure they're standing and looking outside the walls, and they're terrified of this huge army that's making their way towards Jericho. And Joshua and the children of Israel, when they get there, they don't rush headlong into battle. Joshua and the children of Israel are obedient to the commands of God to walk around the city one time, and then they camp for the night. And I'm thinking, surely the people of Jericho are starting to wonder, what is going on? The next day, they wake up and make their way around the city one more time. The third day, they get up and march around the city yet again. I think probably at this time, the city begins to laugh and jeer and mock at the Israelites. They begin to wonder and question the power and authority of Jehovah God. And they're thinking, surely we're going to escape this. But not Rahab and her family. They're locked up in their house. Like they know the power of Jehovah God. And they know that they'll experience God's goodness as long as they stay in that room with the scarlet rope hanging down the wall. Of course, on the seventh day, the Israelites make their way around the city 7 times. And on the 7th time, they raise a cry of shout and praise to God. And it's at that time that the walls of Jericho come tumbling down. Of course, Joshua, in the distance, he sees the scarlet rope and he looks at the spies and he says, listen, go and save Rahab and her family. Bring them to us. And so the spies make their way over to that scarlet rope and they discover Rahab and her family and they bring them to safety. And it's at that point that Rahab and her family are taken from the kingdom of Jericho and transferred into the family of Israel. It's a powerful moment. Salmon and Rahab, they got married. Salmon was really one of the leaders of Israel. And it's a powerful story because Salmon and Rahab, they conceive and have a baby boy named Obed. And Obed is the grandfather of King David, one of the mightiest kings of all of Israel. And then, of course, we know that in that same lineage is Jesus Christ himself. Like Rahab, a prostitute living in Jericho. She's like the great, keep going, the great grandmother of Jesus Christ. To me, it completely gives us a beautiful picture of God's goodness to us when we sin and we fall and we make mistakes, that God's not looking for perfection. He wants to pour out his goodness in our lives. And he does that as we connect to him. When we place our faith and our confidence in him like Rahab did, he pours out his goodness in our lives. We receive goodness. We experience goodness as we connect to God. And that's what the fruit of the Holy Spirit is all about. We don't develop the fruit of the Holy Spirit. We develop that fruit of the Holy Spirit as we connect to God. It's not what we do, it's what he does. It's who he is. So today, would you experience God's goodness as you continue to connect and abide and remain with God. As you connect and remain and abide with God, your whole life will be turned upside down, and you'll bear the fruits of the Holy Spirit in your life. Who knows that you might experience some of the wonderful goodness. You might experience the same goodness that Rahab did in her life, that even though you might be a sinner, even though you may make mistakes, God still pours out his goodness in your life. And then as a result of that, you're able to be good to others. That's the power of the fruit of the Holy Spirit.